warn everybody that since, let me admit one more person here. Okay. Since we are following emergency meeting procedures, we are holding this public meeting digitally, which means that we need to record it and post it. So just be aware of that with whatever is in your video or in the chat box in the comments. Okay, and I think we will start recording.
We are.
Okay. So we have some participants on the phone and some on Teams. So I'm just going to call for the State Review Board members first. Okay. So Jared Edwards, who's the chair, is on the phone.
Present.
Dr. Bucky? Not yet. Okay. Stephanie Dyer Carroll, I see. Good morning.
Hi.
Ken Feder, I see. Good morning.
Good morning.
John Herzian is on the phone.
Good morning.
Okay. Mark McMillan, I see.
Good morning.
Okay. Cecilia Saunders? Not yet.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, you are here. I'm sorry.
Cece's always late.
And she's
I know,
not
I
late,
was
she's on
thinking
time.
that. Usually it's because I'm driving, but now you know the truth. I'm just always late.
There you are.
It takes longer for the signal to get from Greenwich to here.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Chris Wiegren, I see you. And Phil Barlow can't join us today. So we have 8. We have quorum. For staff, we have myself, I'm Jen Schofield, I'm the National Register Coordinator. We have Jane Schneider with us today, who's administrative part of our office, and we have Liz Shapiro, who's the Director of Arts Preservation and Museums. Is there any other staff? Kathy Labadia, I see you.
I'm here, Jenny.
Marina Wisniewski.
And Mary Dunn is lurking.
Hi, Mary.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, then I'm gonna go to consultants. Oops. Okay. With me here. Gretchen Pinio is here from PAL.
Good morning.
With the Winstead Project.
Welcome.
James Sexton is here for the Pinto House relocation.
Good morning.
Welcome.
And Charlotte Hitchcock, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Charlotte is here for the Darling House as the consultant for that nomination. And then if I could ask, when we get to each item, we can ask who is here for the public. But we can also introduce you now. I see Mayor Perez from Winchester. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
I see Margaret Chambers from New Haven.
Hi.
I see Susan Gottschall with the New Haven Preservation Trust.
Actually, I'm from the New Haven Preservation Trust as well.
Okay.
Members.
When we get to the Pinto House, I'll ask again if any members of the public would like to identify themselves, and please also do so before commenting if you are planning to comment. And Elizabeth Halt, I see you. Good morning. Elizabeth is with the New Haven Preservation Trust as well. Is there several other people on? Does anybody else want to say good morning before we get started?
Yeah, hi, good morning. This is Abe Gdansky for the Pinto House, representing ownership.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay, Jenny, do you want me to start the agenda?
Yes, please.
Okay, before we do, I just want to assure the members of the public and the audience that we are delighted that they're listening in. And let me just explain what we'll be doing in a minute here. First, we need to, as a group, approve the minutes of the December 6th meeting, which is the last meeting of our review board before the pandemic. So take out your copies of the minutes, and if you have any comments, please give them. But before we do, I'd like a motion to accept the minutes.
I
So
so
moved.
move.
And I need a second.
Second.
Identify, well,
Cece.
that's John, yes. Oh, Cece. All right. Any additions or corrections to the minutes? Okay, hearing none, they're accepted as distributed. Many thanks. Now, the action items this morning, we have 3 pieces of business, and 2 of them are recently completed National Register nominations. One, the Winstead Waterworks, and the second, the James Darling House. And then we have a project which is a change to National Register listed property in New Haven, which will perhaps take a bit more discussion than the first 2. So I would recommend that we follow the agenda and first deal with the Winstead Waterworks in Winchester, Connecticut. And I need a motion, please, to review that nomination.
John
so move.
Kurzan, I move.
And a second, do we have a second?
A second,
And who you?
Cecilia.
Aha. Thank you both. Any, let's see, staff recommendation first, Jenny.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Sure,
Yes.
perfectly.
You'll hear that a lot of times, right? Okay, so the Winstead Waterworks is recommended for listing by staff. This is a water collection infrastructure for public supply constructed between 1893 and 1895 within the Mad River watershed. It includes 8 structures and 2 sites. It's recommended eligible at the state level under criterion A for community planning and development and C for engineering. This is a late 19th century water system that's pretty well intact, includes gravity fed dams and a tunnel aqueduct, and helped support the development of the city of Winstead as a commercial center and supported the industry that was developing there at the time. The period of significance is 1893 for the earliest components and extends through 1930, which is when the city gained control over the Mad River's output. And we have Gretchen Pinio from PAL, who is online as the author of the nomination. And we have Mayor Perez from the city of Winstead. And I saw James Rollins, I think, as well, who is with Public Works. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I believe Jared will open this for discussion for the board, and then we'll call if you would like to make a comment when it's time.
Yes,
Jared?
and I just want, thank you. I just want to thank the members attending, the mayor particularly, for listening in on our procedure. And we appreciate your being there, and let's get at it. Review board members, comments on the nomination, please. First, identify yourself.
This is Cece. Thanks,
Please,
Jared. I love this one. I absolutely am so impressed in the nomination. Thank you very much. And the footnotes are particularly informative, and I appreciate those footnotes. I did have one question, because it's my ignorance. On section 7, page 7, the top of the page, there is the phrase earth canal prism. And this is new to me. And could someone just explain what that is? Or should it be earthen canal prism? I don't know. I would just like an explanation. But I think the whole thing is just jam up wonderful.
Gretchen, do you want to answer that? Is that just a typo? I think you're on mute still.
Yes. I'm taking a quick look at that. I think it's probably a typo, but let me just double check.
So it's the third line on page 7. It says the earth canal prism is 7 feet deep as built, not accounting for sedimentation. So the question is just about earth or earthen?
Or, I mean, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's probably earthen, but I will double check all of our notes and things, and we'll make corrections as needed.
Fine. I was unfamiliar with it enough to not know if it was a typo. Thank you very much.
I believe it is.
I thought the question was about prism, because to me a prism is a thing that's hanging from a chandelier.
The canal prism describes the triangular shape of the canal. So if you were to take a section through it, it would be the profile shape that it makes. Okay. We're talking about the 3D space. It would be called the prism.
Mm-hmm.
May I go next, I guess? I've got a picky question and a substantive one. The picky
this is Chris Wigren.
Sorry, Chris Wigren. On page 15, you're just discussing, let's see, the paragraph above development of Winchester and Winstead. In the middle of the paragraph, there's a reference to a water supply dam in Drummond, Virginia. And play my Virginian card, and I've never heard of Drummond. There's a Lake Drummond in the middle of the Great Dismal Swamp, but that didn't strike me as a place one would build a water supply dam. So I was just wondering if that might be what that was, I guess.
Okay, I will look into that.
Yes. But my more substantive question is related to the community planning and development aspect. And I was just wondering if there was sort of any information about the effects of the water system on the development of Winstead. Was the service area did this expand the service area? Were there references in marketing or promotional Chamber of Commerce kind of stuff about, hey, we've got a great water system, come do business here? Anything of that sort that sort of demonstrated the effects of building this?
That too, I'll have to take a look at the supplemental materials we have and see if there's anything that pops up. But that's a good question.
Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd like to follow up on this is Cecilia. Just to expand a little bit on, I think this is an excellent proposal. I'm surprised at how intact the system seems to be, which in itself is a cause for its nomination. But I'm surprised that there's no sense of ecological impact on this and the building of this system. And I was just curious whether there were more recently have there been issues raised about the dams and its impact on fishes in the river, etc. And if it was possible to add a little something about that, if in fact it is an issue, because I know that's been true in other dams around Connecticut.
This is Jenny. We could add a point about that historically, but I think if it's a current issue, then that information wouldn't belong in the National Register nomination.
Okay, but it also has relevance historically. And this is a late 19th century development as opposed to late 18th or early 19th, where there are big debates between fishermen and between farmers and booming industry about who would actually get the water. And that doesn't seem to be an issue here at all about who would be benefiting. Perhaps late 19th century that the farming issue had already been resolved somewhat. So I was just spinning my wheels about what the impact of creating the system, both ecologically and socially, in terms of debates about who gets the water. I maybe I missed that in a paragraph somewhere.
I think this is Jenny. I think it could probably be expanded. There's a note about it being public versus industry, I believe. And I think in Winstead, the timing is important here.
Right.
So I think unless Gretchen wants to comment more or anyone from Winstead, I think we could just add some detail there.
Yeah. That'd be
This is Jared. Excuse me. This is Jared, and I was curious. I noted on page 17 on section 8, there's a reference to the 1938 and the 1955 hurricanes, and I remember as a resident of New Haven in 1955, aware of the terrible disaster that occurred in Winstead when most of the buildings on the west side of Main Street were swept into the river and the flood that resulted. And there's really is there any reason to discuss the impact of that hurricane on the proposed nominated system? Was there any damage? Was there any result of the hurricane that needed attention or whatever?
Okay, I see Jim Rollins. Were you trying to make a comment on that or the last?
Yeah, this is Jim Rollins, Public Works, Town of Winchester. To answer a couple of your questions, the two reservoirs, Crystal Lake and Rug Brook, they didn't sustain any damage from the 55 flood. Their watersheds are relatively self-contained, so they didn't catch the brunt of what was coming down the Mad River. So they were pretty much isolated. As far as your question regarding the purpose behind the waterworks and the conflict between agriculture and manufacturing, it was the whole point of the waterworks at that point was really to feed industry. They would capture water from the Crystal Lake watershed, the Rug Brook watershed, and the Mad River watershed. They would divert it from the Mad River into Rug Brook, which would divert through the tunnel. Oh, and by the way, the tunnel is not triangular shaped cross section. It's rectangular. It's roughly 6 by 8. It looks triangular from the inlet that you can see, but once you get in a few feet, it gets rectangular all the way through. So the water would go through that tunnel into Crystal Lake. It would overflow the Crystal Lake Dam, go down Sucker Brook into Highland Lake, and then Highland Lake would discharge back into the Mad River and give water power to all the factories. So that was the main intent. They did at some point, they moved the public water, which was mostly fire suppression at the time, from Highland Lake up to Crystal Lake. And it also then became, potable water. So that's kind of it was really more industrial and manufacturing than it was agriculture.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, review board, any further questions?
Yeah, I just have a couple of small picky things. This is John Herzan. On page 7, section 7, page 7, I'm not sure who's doing the editing, but there's a word missing under the Rugbrook Reservoir. It should be filled in 1893, the first line, if anyone sees it. I don't know if Jenny's making the changes or the consultant.
I see
But
it.
there's just a missing word there. And I had problems with, I think there's some missing words or in the first sentence under the statement of integrity. The sentence doesn't read smoothly to me, and I think it's just an editing thing. But I wondered if Jenny or the consultant could take a look at it and see if maybe some commas or and might help it read smoother. And thirdly, I think State of Connecticut on page 813 should be this. I've always thought that when you say State of Connecticut, state should be capitalized. It's in the upper paragraph, the large paragraph under the summary statement of significance. It's buried in that paragraph. And finally, on page 17, section 8, the last paragraph on the right side, the middle of the paragraph, delete the word the. In the 1912, I think it should just be in 1912. It's just an extra word. But these are totally minor. I think this was a fabulous nomination, and I want to thank the consultants for taking the subject matter so seriously and providing this wonderful record of a resource that is not often thought about much by the average citizen. So thank you for a great job.
Thank you, John. Any further comments from the board?
I'd just like to, commend the town for pursuing this nomination. I mean, a lot of times with public works kinds of things, people get very nervous that National Register designation might make it difficult or impossible for them to make safety improvements or usability improvements or whatever. And I'm glad to see that you have faith in the process here and the ability for us to recognize this important place.
This is Jenny. Sorry, I should have mentioned in the beginning also that all of the actions before you today were noticed at least 30 days before the meeting. And we did not have any comment letters for the Winsted Waterworks.
Thank you, Jenny. Any further comments from the review board?
Yes, this is Mark.
Oh, Mark, please, yes.
Three comments. One, you've already heard several times, Gretchen. I thought this was an amazing nomination. Really enjoyed reading it. Jared kind of took one of my major comments, which was a little bit of context about the floods.
You got the final draft that Sandy put together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I meant there's a couple people who didn't get a read.
Sorry, if you're not Mark, could you put yourself on mute, please?
While I think the nomination stands alone as written, I was kind of left wondering about the floods. And even though We certainly do have dams and reservoirs built in the state as a response to some of the devastation that was caused in the 20s in 1938 and 1955, specifically to handle flood actions. I was wondering, and I know that this is not the purpose of the Winstead Waterworks. I was wondering if there was any kind of ancillary benefit when those floods came that may have, added to the story of the benefit of this system. That was my second comment. Again, I think it could stand. I think your nomination stands alone without that, but it left a question in my mind. And finally, this really gets down to mapping. If this is being mapped as a district, is it being mapped by what we see on Figure 2, which is basically the shores of the reservoirs of Crystal Lake and Rugg, or might you be looking at the larger parcels? Because I know that within the document you refer to some of the planting of trees and some of the, I don't want to say landscaping, but some of the other improvements that were installed as part of this water system to prevent erosion, to keep turbidity out of the water. Because I'm from California and we have a lot of reservoirs there, and from year to year, the shape and size and level of a lake can drastically change. So parcels don't typically change that much, but that was my only other comment.
So this is Jim from Public Works again. As far as the benefits or the ramifications from the floods, mostly 1955, I guess it was the federal government actually created two dams that were not part of the Rugg Brook or Crystal Lake dams or reservoirs. They built the Sucker Brook Dam, which would capture the water before getting into Highland Lake, which is just uphill of Winstead. And then they created the Mad River Dam to capture the water before it gets to Winstead in the Mad River watershed. So that pretty much isolates the two reservoirs from that purpose, because they're downhill of both of those reservoirs.
Good morning, this is Clay, High Caliber Contracting.
Yes, sir.
How are you?
Hi, thank you. We're not onto that action item yet. We're going through some of our earlier agenda items.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Thank you, though. Good morning.
Welcome.
Gretchen, did you have a response?
So in terms of the boundary question, we mostly just sort of contained it to the water sheet because there's later infrastructure that was built on the shores of Crystal Lake, particularly to do water processing and things like that. So we tried to stick to just the strictly historic component.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions from the review board? If not, I'm going to ask that we vote. So all in favor, please say yes.
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 Yes. Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Then it is unanimously carried. Thank you. Thank you.
And let's just make sure there's nobody stuck on mute, right? Okay, thank you.
All right, so moving right along, the second item to be considered
Jared?
is...
Sorry, Jared, did you open the last one for public comment?
Oh, I beg your pardon. Well, we did hear from a number of the people who were there from Winstead describing the questions that were asked of the consultants. Are there further questions from the audience? I don't think we're hearing from them, Jenny. So shall we proceed to the next agenda item, which is the James Alexis Darling House in Woodbridge.
Yes.
And I need a motion, please.
This is Chris. So moved.
And
This
a
is
second?
Second.
So
This is
moved
Ken.
and seconded. Jenny, staff recommendations, please.
Okay. Staff recommends the James Alexis Darling House in Woodbridge for National Register listing at the local level under criteria A and C. This is a 1842 farm cottage with 2 historic outbuildings that, with the National Register listed Thomas Darling House and barns to the south, forms a continuous agrarian landscape. And the other Darling House was listed many years ago. Under criterion A, it's significant for the representation of sort of local economy, which is mixing agriculture, other family businesses, primarily focused on agriculture for this. And for architecture, it's a local expression of a transition from a center chimney cape to the side hall Greek revival plan. The period of significance is 1842 when the house was constructed to 1932 when active farming on the property ended. And we have, the nomination was initiated by the property owners. Notice of this meeting was sent to the property owners, the first selectman, and the Amity and Woodbridge Historical Society. Woodbridge is not a CLG, a certified local government. We did not receive any response letters, and we do have Charlotte Hitchcock on the line on Teams for the nomination. I do not know if we have if the owners or anyone else has called in for the nomination. Thank you.
First, before the review board has comments and questions, is anybody in the members of the public in the audience, do they wish to comment? And if so, just identify yourself, please, and we would love to hear your comment. Okay, not hearing any. Let's turn to the review board for comments. Members of the review board, comments. There are no comments.
No, actually, all right. Well, let me, this is Cecilia. Let me jump in with a simple question. This is well outside my particular area of expertise. But I'm curious, section 7, page 7, there is a mention of the wagon shed / workshop. But it does not say what the workshop is for. I'm assuming it's for repairs, but it would be on the equipment being used on the farm. But I thought it would be very interesting to at least clarify that.
Would you like me to talk about
Charlotte?
that?
Yes, please.
Yes, Charlotte, please.
Charlotte. And the workshop area still contains quite a lot of tools and like maybe workbenches, but it's hard to tell what vintage they are from. So I would assume that they were used for repair of farming equipment and
Right.
other things around the property, but I wasn't really able to identify a significant historic like set of tools or anything like that.
Well, I still think it probably just clarifying what it was used for to the best of your ability. And yeah, it probably was for repair of agricultural implements, as opposed to horseshoeing, for example, though that might have been a repair. You know?
That's what I could.
This is Chris. I mean, I presume that I don't recall any mention of any of the owners sort of carrying out a kind of side business small scale industry, for instance, that might have been used the workshop might have been for, rather than just stuff around the farm.
Right.
This is Charlotte. Yes, I agree with you. I didn't see any evidence of anything other than the local agricultural work.
Yeah, I mean, this is Chris again, and I just, I go by this house frequently, and it's one of those. This is not proper architectural history, but it's lovable, and but it's also very nice to add it to the surrounding properties to create a sort of de facto district, which is one of the really good things about going up that road, is that it does include a lot of landscape farmland and some really interesting buildings as well.
This is Jared, and an observation that I think the nomination is particularly interesting in how Charlotte has documented the, let's call them social advances of the Darling family from generation to generation. And I think that the question about the workshop is an interesting way to look into that, because when the James Alexis house is built, that Mr. Darling has more of a community presence, and the house is less a farm for the sustenance of his family, and it's becoming more of a kind of gentleman's hobby, even at that period. And so I think that is I think this is a very interesting glimpse at how so many of the early settlers of New Haven migrated to the surrounding towns and enjoyed the amenities that we all appreciate in this nomination. Okay, any other comments from the board?
Yes, this is
ready?
Mark. I have a handful of comments. In general, I enjoyed and support this nomination. So I have quite a few comments, and that really relates to my interest in this. So just kind of going right down the list, I can provide my edits offline, of course. On page 5, section 5, page 5, second paragraph, when we're talking about integrity, and you talk about the pastoral setting contributing to the integrity of the historic nature of this site, setting it in is in and of itself an aspect of integrity. So perhaps just a rewording of that would strengthen this this nomination. It does have a very strong sense of setting in that it is within an intact pastoral landscape, that it does have buildings that relate to it and relate to its period of significance. So maybe just a rewording of that. In the same paragraph, there's a discussion of the dry-laid masonry wall. Perhaps it's important enough to mention, maybe giving it a little more context. It wasn't clear to me how that wall related to the property. Was there a break in the wall that led to the main entrance? Was it meant to divide and separate from the turnpike in front of it? Just kind of a little context there of why it was mentioned and why it's important in this nomination. The next page, section 7, page 6, my only suggestion is on the interior discussion, taking the second paragraph, the one that begins with the house has a post and beam timber frame, and moving it to the very front of this discussion, because that allows you to set up, here's the structure of the house, and here's how the interior reflects or responds to how the house is framed, how the rooms are laid out, how the fireplaces open onto one room or another. I think just no edits except for just moving that and providing a transition and setting up, you know, as Louis Sullivan would say, what's the form and here comes the function.
Excellent comment, Mark.
And then the other comments I had are pretty minor. I think they're probably best handled by just handing you my edits rather than taking up the whole meeting with them. Actually, I had a similar comment on section 7, page 8 of this document, taking the last paragraph, or excuse me, the last sentence of the integrity section. The house and its outbuildings and surrounding landscapes evoke a strong feeling. And again, moving that up to the very front, because that gives you the context, that kind of makes your statement of why this property is significant. And then you can talk about its integrity. You know, why is it still intact enough to convey that that significance? That was pretty much it.
Thank you very much, Mark. Other comments from members of the review board? If not, let's have a vote to all in favor, say aye or yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? That's the other way to get at it. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Well, hearing none, we assume that it is unanimously approved. Thank you very much. And Charlotte, thank you very much for a wonderful nomination also.
Thank you for appreciating it. It's really nice to bring it to a close.
Thank you. All right, now let us turn to the next item on the agenda, which is referred to as changes to National Register listed property in item 4B on our agenda, the William Pinto House, New Haven, proposed relocation. And Jenny, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. So just to clarify for everyone, when a house is proposed for relocation, if the owner or interested party wishes to keep the National Register listed status, there's a pre-move documentation that is prepared, and that documentation follows the same process as a new nomination. So this documentation answers questions that the Park Service has specified in their federal regulations. The documentation is presented to you. It was noticed 30 days or more before the meeting. And then it follows the same route as a new National Register nomination in terms of approvals. So it's reviewed by the State Review Board and then forwarded to the Park Service for review. If the Park Service approves the pre-move documentation before the building is relocated, then the property keeps the National Register listed status. So we are looking at the William Pinto House in New Haven, which is proposed for relocation from 275 Orange Street, 87 feet to the adjacent lot at 283 Orange Street. The property was listed in the National Register in 1987, was constructed in the early 19th century, and has a rear addition dating to the 80s, which replaced an earlier 1953 brick addition. In the nomination, the property was listed under Criterion B for association with William Pinto and also for Eli Whitney. And it's also meeting Criterion C as a representation of an early 19th century gable to street form. Notice of the pre-move documentation was sent to the property owner, the mayor, the Historic District Commission, the New Haven Preservation Trust, Preservation Connecticut, the City Plan Commission. And we have received bear with me here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. We have received 7 letters of support as of this morning around 9 o'clock. I'm sorry, 6 letters of support. We received 1 letter that expressed a concern about the compromising of integrity through relocation. And we received 1 letter expressing concern about integrity of the house in relation to new development proposed. All of those letters have been shared with the board. If anybody wants me to read any sections of them, I can pull them up if necessary. It's about 10 to 12 pages of comments. And just a reminder that what the board is reviewing today is not part of any local approval process. The board is tasked with whether or not the relocation as described in the pre-move documentation, whether or not that compromises the integrity of the building or the qualities which make it eligible for listing. So this state review board is looking at the pre-move documentation that I've referenced, which has been posted on our website for more than a month, and deciding whether the property will continue to maintain its National Register status. We have several people on Teams and online by phone. James Sexton is here. He's the consultant for the pre-move documentation. And Jared, when you open for public comment, maybe we can just ask who else wishes to speak. And I'm all done. That's your cue.
Well, thank you. Before we turn to James, would you, in the audience, any members of the public wish to comment about the proposed relocation of the Pinto House? If you wish to speak, just identify yourself and share your thoughts.
Okay, Elizabeth Holt is trying to speak. Try again. Elizabeth, I see you turned your mic off, but we can't hear you, which might be a speaker issue. If you have the comments, oh, we can hear you now. Okay. No. If you want to turn your chat function on, maybe you can comment if you want to type. There's a conversation bubble down in the taskbar at the bottom, and if you click that, it says show conversation, and you may be able to type in there. Okay, Elizabeth is trying very hard. Depending on how computers are set up at home, sometimes Teams does not work. Elizabeth, maybe we can go to.
She's in the app.
Okay.
She wants to read her letter into the record.
You want to read your letter? Okay.
If she can't, Jenny, can you read it?
Yes, bear with me here. Let me see if I can just pull it up, okay? See which one. Okay, hold on, Elizabeth. I'm trying to pull up the right letter here. Okay. Okay, I'm going to read a letter from Elizabeth. I can see you. This is the letter from Rona, right? It's not signed by you. Is that the one you want to read? Okay. Okay. Okay, bear with me. This is a letter dated May 28th. New Haven Preservation Trust support for retaining National Register listed status for Pinto House. Dear Miss Schofield, I submit this letter on behalf of the New Haven Preservation Trust as testimony to the State Review Board for its meeting on June 12, 2020, in regard to retaining the individual listing of the Pinto House, 275 Orange Street, New Haven, on the National Register of Historic Places. The New Haven Preservation Trust has worked closely with the owners, developers, and attorneys for the Pinto House move and can therefore speak to the need for the move and the owner's intention to maintain the integrity of this historic house. The Historic Resources Inventory and the National Register nomination show that this house dates to circa 1805 and has an impressive history in addition to architectural merit. Furthermore, the Pinto House was considered important enough to receive Historic American Buildings Survey documentation for preservation in the Library of Congress. The Habs entry was prepared jointly in 1964 by Habs and the New Haven Preservation Trust in a project funded in part by the National Park Service. At the site plan review by the New Haven City Plan Commission in December 2019, the site plan illustrated the current position of the house to be at the center of the proposed development. Though the developers had explored the idea of building around the house, it was ultimately determined that the more appropriate plan would be to move the house to the north end of the site. When the developers met with the Trust Preservation Committee, committee members were in agreement that this move was the best solution. By moving the Pinto House to the northern part of the site beside another 19th century house, the smaller scale historic context of the block is maintained. From the earliest meetings with the developers, the Trust has urged that all efforts be made to maintain the Pinto House's listing on the National Register of Historic Places. The Trust's discussion with the developers have placed emphasis on the need to preserve key elements of the structure, such as the brownstone foundation. We also believe that the short move of less than 90 feet will not detrimentally affect the integrity of the historic context of the Pinto House. James Sexton's report, this is the pre-move documentation, states that notwithstanding changes since the listing in 1985, quote, many major original interior features such as mantelpieces, trim moldings, and doors identified in the nomination, including the front staircase, remain intact, end quote. He concludes that the retention of these features suggests that, quote, although the integrity of design has been affected, the building retains enough of its character-defining features for this aspect of integrity to be preserved, end quote. Over most of a year, the owners, developers, New Haven Preservation Trust, and City of New Haven have worked together to protect one of the city's few individually listed National Register properties. The Trust supports the information as described in James Sexton's memo and believes that the proposed move meets the federal criteria for continued listing on the National Register of Historic Places after relocation. We urge you to approve the proposal. Thank you for your consideration. And this is signed by Rona Johnson, the president of the New Haven Preservation Trust.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for an excellent letter of recommendation. And Review Board will appreciate consideration of that. James, as consultant, are you available for answering some questions?
Certainly.
Great. And Jenny, what is the criteria for the nomination?
The criteria it was listed under, or the Park Service information needs for relocation?
The latter.
Okay. So in the federal regulations, the the Park Service asked for documentation that states the reasons for the move, the effect on the property's historical integrity from the move, during and after, the new setting and general environment of the proposed site, including evidence that the proposed site does not possess historical or archaeological significance that would be adversely affected by the intrusion of the new property. So this is the impact of moving the building to the other site. And they request photographs showing the proposed location. This is the type of information that Park Service requires. They do not require one specific format for providing this information because the level of detail and format may change on a case-by-case basis depending on what the situation is for each building relocation. So the format is determined through the process by SHPO and the board. Does that answer your question, Jared? Or?
Yep.
Okay.
No, it does, exactly. Now let's see, have we asked for a motion and a seconding? Not yet. Do we have a motion to review the subject, please?
I so move.
I so move.
Oh, and there's a
That was
third.
a second.
That's the second. So moved and seconded.
I'll second. Cecilia.
Oh, but you didn't sound as cheerful as the little voice. Excellent. Okay. Would anybody in the audience like to comment on this? If not, let's turn to the review board.
My name is Clay Markham, High Caliber Contracting. I'm on the call. I was asked to be on the call. I'm the prospective building mover, so if anybody has a question for me, I'd be more than happy to try to answer it.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us.
Sure.
Anybody else in the public? If not, review board, questions from you.
I have a question about a couple of elements that are reflected in the architect's drawings of the house on its new location. If you look at the HABS documentation, the basement still retains a really intact brick floor. And it seems to me that that's a very distinctive element of that building's architectural fabric. And I wasn't clear from the documentation whether that brick floor would be moved to the or reassembled on the new site. That's one question. The other question, which is more visible to the public, is that the steps to the front door are reversed after the relocation. And that, to me, is something I would like other opinions on, whether the board feels that that is a change of integrity. The fact that it was recorded by HABS makes me a little bit more conscious of these details than if it were a contributing building in a district. I just feel that given the historical significance of this property in New Haven, as well as its architectural level of preservation, to keep it on the register, I don't feel we should diminish anything it has now in terms of integrity. And those are two items that I would like other opinions on. Mm-hmm. But I'm not comfortable with the reversing the direction of the steps or if the brick floor isn't going, I'm opposed to that aspect of it. But I am totally in support of the project and moving the building to preserve it. That's been done before when I worked in Newport, Rhode Island. Many of the buildings in Newport's historic district have been moved all over the place in downtown Newport. They were considered valuable resources, and this is a valuable resource too, for perhaps different reasons, but it has a lot of meaning to the Jewish community in Connecticut as well as architectural preservationists, and I feel strongly about doing everything we can to preserve the details that give it its unique character.
Hi, John. This is James. If I can address your
Yes,
first
sir.
question. The brick floor appears to have been either removed or covered over with concrete during the restoration that happened after the nomination was written. So
Thank you.
that's no longer a visible element, certainly, of the house.
Got it.
James, this is Jared, and I have a question about the so-called 1987 renovations when the concrete block addition that was put on by the Munson Gallery was taken off, and a new two-story addition was put at the back of the house with a hip roof and with round-topped windows on the second floor, etc. Was that 1987 renovation also when the 1/1 windows were replaced with what were thought to be replicas of the original windows?
Off the top of my head, I think the windows are earlier, but I can double check that for you.
Well, I guess what I realize is that in 1985 the nomination was approved by the Park Service. In '87, this renovation to the building was completed. So within 2 years of the building being listed, it's undergoing a major renovation, let's put it that way, and which, as you point out, concrete was poured on the brick floor in the basement. But do you have any information as to how that renovation may have altered any of the earlier original ornament, wood carving elements, decorative elements on the interior or exterior of the building?
Sure. And I just checked my notes. It looks as though the windows were done in 1990. I don't know if you saw, Jared, I sent Jenny, and Jenny passed on to the board and made accessible to the public a series of photographs comparing the nomination photos with the current conditions.
Right.
And remarkably, the renovations were mostly additive and didn't remove, the front stairs or any of the fireplace surrounds or, finish trim or, for the most part, doors. So while they added a somewhat awkward staircase on the east side, they didn't really remove that much material, and certainly the material identified in the nomination, for the most part, remains intact.
Now, what about the exterior ornament, architectural, that's described in detail in the nomination, 85 nomination?
That's intact.
Okay, and how is that documented, just out of curiosity?
How did I document it, or how was it previously documented?
No, is it currently documented? I mean, is its present condition? Do we have any records?
Current condition is documented in that series of photographs.
Okay. That was my question.
Okay.
Now, there were just a couple of things. The Munson Gallery owned the property, I'm assuming, in about 1950 to about 1970? Do you have any ideas of when they owned the property, and did they in fact do the alterations to finish off the apartment on the second floor and attic?
The function of the document that I prepared is more directed at the specific questions asked by the Park Service. So I didn't look into ownership in any detail. My sense of the alterations to the attic and the other alterations is that they were done after the Munson Galleries had moved out. I can tell you, if you give me one moment, the name on the building permits. I don't remember it being a Munson name. The two-story addition was done for law offices. The name on the building permit is that of the contractor who's doing the work.
Okay. All right. Those are my questions. Thank you for your answers.
Sure.
This is Jenny. I think what Jared was getting at is because we have different types of relocations and they're not frequent, they're every few years, we have different types of documentation. And the last building relocation we looked at was much more intensive because of the nature of the move. However, in the pre-move documentation we had for that one, which was the Hoyt Barnum House in Stamford, we had a lot more detail about like a matrix of every feature and the date and whether it had been altered or not. So I know, James, that you had done the additional documentation in terms of comparing photos between now and the National Register nomination, which I've shared with the board. Jared had asked me about, whether or not we had that more detailed documentation of the changes overall. And so I think that might inform some of the questions that you're getting.
Sure.
Is that?
Thank you, Jenny.
This is Chris. Can I go? Yeah, I think the Park Service has done us something of a disservice by not giving us more guidance on what to consider. I realize that every situation is different, but every nomination situation is different too, and we've got clearer guidelines about how to prepare a nomination. But in talking about alterations since the National Register nomination, I just noted a couple of things that you seem to have missed, James. 2 of the 3 exterior chimneys have been removed since 1985. There were the cellar alterations. It looks as though the front door has been either replaced or altered. The panel configuration is a bit different. And also, when you mentioned that doors were moved, does that mean that the physical leaf of the door has been switched from one opening to another, or that the door openings have been rearranged?
I would say both, although that's more of a gut reaction than something that I went through and specifically looked at. I mean, one of the challenges with the HABs documentation is that it's only a first floor plan.
Yeah, and it's even older than the National Register, so there were, as it noted, changes in that period as well. And then on the new site, I think you mentioned a basement. I know in some of the conversations, the developers talked about just having a crawl space. So I don't know what the current plan is, but that might have an effect on the archaeology in the new site. And I would suggest that it would be good to quantify, how many borings were taken, how deep were they, where were they, and attach the archaeologist's report to this documentation.
Yeah, the geotech boring report was passed along to Jenny, but it came too late to be shared with you guys. So that
Okay.
was.
I received it yesterday, so
Yeah.
I have it now, but it came yesterday.
The Park Service will definitely, John Herzan, I know that the Park Service is going to look very closely at the archaeological impact of the move at the new site and probably at the original site. It's got to be addressed more, it has to have more information included for them to really feel comfortable with the move from my experience with the Park Service. The other thing is, James, I appreciate your information on the brick floor situation, but we really didn't get into my other concern, which was the reversal of the step orientation. And that you didn't comment on. Can you tell me why that's necessary?
I can't. I would need to get back to you on that, John, and I didn't comment on it because I thought you were looking for comments from the other board members.
That's okay, but I guess I have to state that I'm very concerned about that reversal because it doesn't seem to be consistent with the intent of the move.
Well, I mean, just looking at the plans, it appears that if you keep the stairs in their current configuration, it lands people right into a driveway.
Yeah.
And it looks like just a convenient safety more than convenient, I would say.
This is Jared. I was wondering if, James, if you had any, do you have the date when Orange Street was widened that caused the original steps and stoop to be removed and replaced with what's there now?
I don't, Jared. Again, that was something that didn't feel as though it was within the scope of my brief. I can certainly dig into.
Well, no, my question, I guess, relates to the fact that the steps as they exist and the ironwork date from the time the street was widened. I was just curious whether that was in the middle of the 19th century, was that in the third quarter of the 19th century, was that in 1900? Because I think that has something to do with whether or not the steps in its present location has the sort of historical context of original stairs. They are not the original steps. So it would be very interesting to know when the present set of steps was approximately when they were installed.
Mm-hmm. No,
if I may,
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, Chris.
That's mentioned in the National Register nomination in 1985 as just kind of a supposition. It's conjectural. So they don't provide any evidence for that. It's just somebody's assumption. I'd also note that the railing has been replaced since 1985.
Okay, and then another question just from Jared. The masonry that supports the steps, the treads, et cetera, is that red sandstone or is that brick?
It's red sandstone.
It is red sandstone.
I believe so, yes.
So, John, you have your answer there that those steps perhaps were either done originally, or the fact that it's not a brick masonry or some other form of masonry, and it's the fact that it matches the facing on, as I understand James's comments, the facing on the street, the facing of the basement wall on the street is all red sandstone, and that it's trap rock on the north, east, and south sides of the basement.
But what about the orientation? It won't be, will it be? I still am not clear why it's been reversed.
I think the problem is you come down the steps and you step right into the traffic, the oncoming traffic from the left, out of the parking lot.
That for the new building, the traffic?
All the traffic from the back of the building comes, I believe, down that double driveway. I mean, 2-lane driveway.
Yeah. I just wonder if the Park Service will have a problem with that. But maybe I'm overthinking it.
Well,
I can certainly raise it with the architects and see, get more information on why they've chosen to do that.
And also confirm the use of red sandstone.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what Jenny suggested I go back and talk to the architects about the way in which the foundation will be handled post-move.
Correct.
And the architects confirmed that the red sandstone would be numbered and placed back, in its original relative positions.
Right. That's good. Okay. Any other questions for James? Review board, are you there?
Yes.
Do we have any questions for the mover as to how the building will actually be relocated and what measures will be taken to stabilize it during the move? This is John Herzan again. Perhaps the mover could respond to that.
I would also, this is Cecilia, I also would be interested as a completely new observer here. How's the foundation going to be moved? And how much of the foundation? Just the front or all of it?
Okay, well, this is the prospective building mover, Clay from High Caliber. As far as the foundation getting moved, we're not, involved in moving the foundation, so that would be up to what the general contractor is going to do. As far as if you guys like to comment on stabilizing the building, I could do that now.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so a building like that, any building move, we're basically going to put a table of steel under that building. There's going to be main I-beams going the length of the building, heavy steel I-beams going, front to back from the front staircase away from the road. And then there's going to be a piece of cross steel, a minimum every 7 feet. And then we're going to have actually quite a bit more steel because there's two remnant fireplaces that don't go through the roof that you guys have already spoken about. And there's the one that does go through the roof, and those are going to get steel through them also. So there's going to be more steel than every 7 feet, according to how it lays out with the old masonry mass, chimney masses. And then when you put that steel in there, what the key to any house moving job or even lifting is that you shim that steel to the existing wood, and you just kind of spring it with wedges. So you pre-deflect the steel, and you take up the deflection in the wood that exists in the building, and that keeps the building stable from a floor plane standpoint from below. So, and then we're going to move it on steel rails. We're going to have heavy I-beam rails that are going to go perpendicular to those main I-beams, and we're going to have these devices called skates that sit in between the two sections of beams perpendicular to each other, and we're going to push it on those rails.
Could that be included? This is John Herzan again. Could that very clear description be summarized for the documentation so the Park Service has assurance that it will be safely relocated?
Of course.
And this is Jenny. I think That would be really helpful to add all that detail. If you could also reference drawings when you do that, that would be helpful.
I'm not sure that drawings have been produced to demonstrate the methods used for the move of this particular building.
Oh, I think that there is the aerial view on which is projected the track, not the track, but the path of the move from the south to the north. You see what
right. It was my understanding. Yes, Jared, you are correct. It was my understanding that Jenny was asking for additional drawings related to specific elements of the move. Did I misunderstand your question, Jenny?
No, I mean, typically we do have a drawing that shows, for example, like where the steel would be inserted. So I was just suggesting that if you add this additional text, there be a drawing, or if it's already done, that it just reference the drawing number. But if that's not something the board wants, then that's okay. I'm just trying to anticipate what the Park Service might ask for, so don't run into an obstacle when the documentation gets there.
Understood. Clay, do you have any drawings that relate to steel placement?
No, I don't. No, I don't. And that's not really typical of most building moves. I mean, certainly, it could be developed, but I'd like to say a few things about that. If you do a drawing, a lot of what we do as building movers is not just a science, it's kind of an art. So why I'm saying that is because everything changes in the field conditions. So let's just say, for instance, you guys are trying to save a certain sandstone. All right. So, some of these sandstones are going to have to come out before we even attempt to load it with steel. So we may move that piece of steel a little bit to keep one sandstone, intact. I'm just giving an example. Some of the masonry masses you can't even identify at this point. That built the basement hasn't been gutted and there's renovations under there. You can't see exactly where that is. So even if I were to develop a drawing, it's going to be subject to change until we get into the field. Secondly, a lot of times, even when I work for the biggest general contractors for very large buildings, once you put that drawing out there, now it's subject to other people to review as far as, oh, well, maybe he should do this and maybe he should do that. So you're getting into kind of a can of worms. So certainly something could be done, but it's going to say approximate, and that's about it. It's going to,
Well, this is Jared again, and it seems to me that what you're saying is absolutely correct, but there's nothing wrong with not a drawing, but something that is simply a diagram, and it could take the existing drawing we were mentioning earlier and mark it up in such a way as to show where you're proposing the parallel steel running from front to back of the house, and then the locations of the track that will provide you to slide it to the new site. I think a diagram, and I could be explicitly marked as conceptual layout of the cribbage that required in steel to move the house or something like that. That's all we're looking for, is something that describes your intent, not an engineered drawing.
Okay.
Maybe in that case, this is Chris. It would be better to stick with the verbal description and not create a diagram that somebody would mistake for precise drawings.
Of course, that's a good idea too.
Yeah.
Go for it. Okay. Any other questions for the moving contractor?
So
Are
if
there
I can
any other
just
questions?
clarify. Yeah, this is James. So the recommendation is to follow Chris's suggestion of a verbal description without any drawing or diagram.
Correct.
Okay,
And just
Which would cover excuse me, this is John Herzan, which would include some of the qualifiers that the mover stated, that, that they would have to work with the situation as it evolves, and to give them some leeway as to accomplishing what we all want, is to have the building arrive intact. I just think it's important to give them some leeway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay,
Correct.
Jared,
It's our obligation to make sure we move the building intact. That's our main objective.
Yes. But to describe how it's done, or how it will be done, and what some of the variables are, I think would help the Park Service feel comfortable with the program.
Yep, I will write that up and then run it past Clay to make sure that he is comfortable the way I've worded it.
Sure,
James,
we can
I
work
have
on
one
that
last-
document. That would be fine.
Great, thank you.
James, I have one last question. It's Jared again. And I'm just curious, in your nomination, you use terminology like southwestern facing or northwestern. And my recollection is that Orange Street basically is north and south, right? And so the house is facing west and its rear elevation is east. Oops. Somebody isn't on mute.
James, you're muted.
James is on mute.
I see.
I am, and somebody else isn't. It feels as though it's directly north-south. In fact, it is to the east of north. And the house is, the corner of the house is essentially the corners of the house are at the cardinal directions.
So I think the consistent language from the 1985 nomination should be carried over in your comments and use the same coordinates. That's all.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions for James? If not,
I have one or a question and then a recommendation. On page 5,
you are.
Stephanie, sorry.
Thank you.
Dyer Carroll.
Thank you, Stephanie. Welcome.
Page
5.
Page 5. Your discussion of integrity and continued eligibility under criterion B. The last sentence could be read to suggest that it is no longer eligible under B at all, which I don't think is your intent, but when I first read it, I read it that way.
Would it help if I added a phrase, criterion B as it relates to Eli Whitney?
Yes, because I think you've said that it is still, the association is still there with Pinto above. So
right,
it's there, but as a closing sentence, I read that
Understood.
and I thought, okay, it's no longer eligible under B. The other thing is in the next paragraph under C, we've discussed the change in the stairs, and we've discussed aspects of the foundation, and it seems to me that those should be discussed and acknowledged here, and they may not ultimately, it may retain integrity of design and workmanship and materials, but it seemed like those were glossed over. And I
Okay.
don't know whether anybody else, any of the other board members felt the same thing.
Well, also sort of related to that, right in the middle of that paragraph, sentence
Which
says,
one, Chris?
The criterion C paragraph on page 5.
Yes, okay.
The interior will also be left relatively undisturbed by the move. That word relatively opens up the possibility that there are disturbances planned, and I don't think you've told us what it would be for the interior.
I can strike relatively.
This is Jared, and I'm just curious. The 85 nomination is very specific, I believe, in the role that Whitney played in the house, in that he provided a mortgage to the Pintos so they could move to New York. And it doesn't say that Whitney came back to the Pintos because the Pintos hadn't been there for 40 years or something like that, according to my calculation. So I wonder if that sentence doesn't need to be perhaps just rewritten so that you reflect more of what's said in the 1985 nomination.
I'm sorry, Jared, which sentence?
I'm talking about the second to last sentence in the criterion B paragraph, in which you say the connection to Eli Whitney is more tangential.
Oh.
Whitney is thought to have died in the house while visiting William Pinto. Well, where do you get all that information, and what is your footnote? I mean, that's contrary to what's said in the 85 nomination.
I don't believe it's contrary, but I will confirm my sense that came from the nomination. If it's not from the nomination, I will give an appropriate citation for it or strike it if it looks as though it's come from my imagination.
Or revise it as you see fit. That
Okay.
was fine.
Yep. Happily.
I believe that, this is Chris, I believe the nomination talks about Whitney renting the house from the Pintos. And renting something,
yes, but
they pretty much conclude that it's this house, which is sort of the local legend. But
Right, which is
a different,
yeah,
something different.
Right, which is
well,
why.
You know, if,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we should need some detail here, because if Whitney actually gave Pinto a mortgage on the house, Whitney would have paid him a chunk of money, and what would have Whitney gotten in return? The rent of the house? I mean, was this the deal? That Pinto could continue to own it, but that Whitney
Well, it
had
meant that Whitney lent
occupancy?
money to Pinto and the house was secured.
Precisely. Yes. So that should be clarified, I think, if we could document it. All right, we're wandering off here. Sorry. Thank you. Any other questions for James, or general questions of Jenny? If not, should we have a vote?
Wait, I just have one. This is Cece. I want to
Yes,
make
sir.
sure that the archaeology is well in hand. I have worked on some of these National Register houses that were moved, and we have found wonderful insights into the former lives in going through that process. So I just wanted to make sure it was going to be handled well and required.
I think
The
that we should.
information, this is Jenny, the information we have on that is what's in the report and the geotechnical report that just came in. I'll share with you what we have right now. I know, Ken, were you trying to answer that, or you're asking something else? You're on mute.
I was going to
That's
ask
because I have a phone ringing in the office and I'm trying to.
Oh, no, Ken was.
I was going to ask exactly the question that Cece was asking, making sure that there's an archaeological survey both at the current location and at the proposed location.
How's it going?
Yeah.
James, do you want to address that? I don't have anything besides what's in the documentation right now.
James, you're on mute.
Okay.
We've lost James.
An archaeological survey is not planned. The geotech report was reviewed by Meg Harper, and the comments in the archaeology section of the pre-move documentation are from her. My memory, and this is not my field, so I don't want to speak too much about it, was that it appeared to be a fairly jumbled mix of fill, but that's probably
Those are famous last words.
I know. I understand that. So I will let Meg's words stand, and the geotech report that they're based on is finally in Jenny's hands.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay. Are we ready for a vote?
No.
Jared, could we amend the motion to include that the archaeology issue, the foundation issue, the porch orientation issue will all be addressed? It's conditional upon those being adequately described in the final documentation. I would feel better if they were pinned down, because I want to make sure it gets through the Park Service, if you want to know the truth.
And
No, I
John,
think
I'm
that's
going to interrupt.
perfect.
This is Jenny. Margaret Chambers wanted to comment, just raising her hand here.
Okay.
Yes, it's Peg Chambers. You can hear me, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm with the Preservation Committee of the and sit on the board of the New Haven Preservation Trust. And in hearing what John just has summarized, I'd like to suggest that in the summary of the sequence of the work on the moving of the house, that there be reference made to how that work on the foundations move by the general contractor is going to be coordinated with the actual move of the house. I would think that at the national level, they would be most interested in hearing that had been worked out. That's all.
Yeah, and that's related to the question I had asked earlier about the foundation, which I don't think was it was answered. So I approve of John Herzen's suggestion. There are too many things not pinned down yet.
So, John, do you want to pick up here? Because
I will, but I don't mind being edited by other board members. But basically,
no.
I would like to make a motion that we approve the move of this building with the understanding that the documentation address the concerns that we discussed, specifically the method of moving, a description of how the building will be moved, a description of why how the foundation will be conserved and rebuilt, why the porch orientation has been reversed, and what the justification for it is.
And the archaeology.
And the archaeological evaluation of both the existing site and the new site, so that the Park Service is comfortable with that consideration, which I know they will want to have more information on.
This is Jenny. I would add the comparison photographs that James has provided should be added to the pre-move package. So you've got the pre-move documentation 30 days in advance, and then I was trying to help James be able to clarify some information. So he provided the comparison photos about a couple weeks ago, and the geotech report came today. So I would suggest that all that stuff that's been coming in also be added. And I would like for the board to look at the complete package. So it's not just me kind of collecting stuff. I would like the board to look at the complete package with all of the information in it before it goes.
Would you post it on your website for our review so we could do that?
Yes, I can do that.
And
When is the project going to begin? I mean, the development project.
Timing.
James, or a representative for the property, could you answer that? I don't have that information.
Yeah, I don't have it either. Is AB still on the line?
Apparently not.
I know that they are anxious to move forward in areas where they can move forward without disturbing the Pinto House, because there are real concerns about having construction be delayed to the point where it goes into winter and becomes a much more expensive project. But I don't know. I have not seen a specific date that they want to move the house by. I think they were waiting for approval from the review board and the NPS before they moved.
So this is Chris. Jenny, when you're talking about the board reviewing the complete package, do you mean doing that at our next meeting or by email in between? Yeah, you're muted.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
Can everybody else go on mute for a moment? I'm not sure where that's coming from.
I'm telling you, we did. It was a big to-do.
That's really up to the board and what the board is comfortable with. I don't mind having ongoing communication. I don't know that it, for me, necessarily needs to come to another meeting if you have clearly defined what type of information you want. Then I think we can be working on that and be communicating about that. I just want the board to look at it and be okay with the information. So that's up to the board. I'm seeing Susan Godshall's raising a hand.
Hi, can you hear me? Am I muted? You can hear me?
Yes.
The Preservation Trust has been in extensive discussions with the development team, including their legal consultants and others. They understand that there is a period of time after the review board's approval, should you so vote, when it goes to Washington. I'm not going to get into that because it's my skill area, but they, and that takes us to September, I believe. But they are, may I say, adamant that they're going to go forward after that time. The point is, I would hate to see the board, and I'm just the public here, hate to see the board push it off for another quarter of a year, because in essence, that means another quarter of a year plus another period in Washington. And I just don't think that the development can sustain that delay.
Okay, that's not what we're discussing. I thought we were discussing the fact that the information could be posted on the Historic Preservation State Office's website for us to look at. And that's what Jenny wanted, is to make sure that we had a look at it But that
Yes,
didn't
thank you.
imply that it was going to be months
And whether
away.
it should wait for another board meeting.
Yeah, and I was just trying to confirm that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so it sounds like there is consensus that the board can and will look at it if a revised move documentation with all of the information needs you've identified is posted on our website.
Yes, and
I
may
would
just interrupt and suggest that you post it, and if you hear any negative comments or need to change, you be informed. If you don't hear from people as of a certain date, say that is the cutoff for comment, and if they don't comment by then, it's going ahead without further change. Does that make sense?
No, they're dead to us. So who can I use to look at this?
Yes, this is Jenny. That makes sense. And I just want to clarify for the record again that the purpose of the information being requested is certainly not to delay the project, but to make sure there's enough detail so that the move will be successful in terms of protecting the house, and also so that the Park Service, who's not been engaged in any conversations, has enough information in the documentation that they feel comfortable approving. Because it would cause a delay if it got to the Park Service and they needed more detail. So I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah, and this is Abe Gdansky. I don't know why my phone was muted before, so I called in to do the video. But we're ready to start now. The only thing we're waiting on is this last piece, which is going through this process and trying to get the approval. But otherwise, our timeline on the development is we're ready to start. We have finished drawings and we're ready to go.
Do you understand this, Jared, as chair of the review board? We're eager to get you going, but the point is that the Park Service needs certain basic information which we're requesting be sent to them as soon as possible. And as soon as that's accomplished, you're off, right?
Yes.
Okay.
You're off when the Park Service approves it.
Well,
exactly. But let's get it to the Park Service as soon as possible, is my point.
Yeah, this is James, just so I can confirm that I'm understanding the process. So I will make the revisions that you've requested. I will forward the revised copy to Jenny. Jenny will make it accessible to the review board. It will be available for your comment for a specific period of time. If she hears no comments from you, it will then be cleared to be sent on to the Park Service, and their period of review will then be started.
Sounds good.
Right, yeah.
Everybody agree?
Yep.
Hearing
Are we
nothing?
voting on the motion?
No. We're talking about approving what James has just restated.
Okay, yeah.
So we're in agreement with you, James.
Yep.
Great. And just one point of information, Jenny. I know the Park Service is not in their offices at the moment either. Do you have a sense of how much of a delay that is adding to their review?
So there's absolutely no delay. There's no delay from SHPO. There's no delay from the Park Service. The Park Service is doing what we're doing. They're fully functional, full-time remote telecommuting. They have moved to a temporary digital submission system, and they are available in the regular ways by phone and email. So there is no delay. The only delay is really in the level of detail of information and how quickly we can get that together. So that
Understood. So just to confirm, they are accepting electronic submissions.
Yes, they are accepting electronic submissions. I have already submitted a couple nominations in that way, and it went through glitch-free, and those are actually listed. So I would not worry about that. And it, in the regular way as a new nomination would come to SHPO. The State Historic Preservation Officer also signs off on this. And it is forwarded by me to the Park Service, and I can let you know when they log it in, when it's received, and then their regular 45-day review period would start. So there's no change other than for me in the whether I snail mail it or email it, really.
Great.
But there's no delay.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready for a vote?
Yep.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? Who is that?
I just realized I was unmuted, Cece. That was a late one.
Oh, Cece, you're approving. So, all right. So we have no votes in opposition and no abstentions. So the motion is carried. Thank you all very much. James, thank you for your patience. Everybody,
everyone.
thank you. Stay safe, as they say.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jenny, for an excellent meeting, and I know it wasn't easy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jared, we have a couple agenda items.
Discussion. Yep.
I don't know that we have anything for them, but you might just want to run through.
Any
item
items for
5 was
discussion? Nope.
Okay.
Any new business? Hearing none. Staff report.
Liz Shapiro, do you have anything?
I think I would defer to you, Jenny. Anything that you want to share? Oh, I do want to share one thing, actually. I'm sorry. I almost forgot. I'm very delighted to announce that we have been able to hire a new staff person in the SHPO's office, and he will serve as our deputy SHPO. His name is Jonathan Kinney, and he is coming from the New Jersey SHPO, and he is relocating with his family to Connecticut. He will be starting on July 6th. He will be starting work remotely, as we are all doing. And so I'd just like to give a shout out to Mark McMillan and Stacy Barrow, who were highly involved with the process of interviewing and selecting the final candidate. So that's really exciting news. Other than that, I think the biggest news would be coming from Jenny in terms of what is happening with our digitization project. And she would be a much better person to address that. But does anyone have any questions about Jonathan?
What's
we welcome him.
Position?
He is
Deputy
coming in. Yeah, Cece, he is. Cecilia, he is coming in to replace the position that I had. So his official state title is Director of Historic Preservation and Museums. So that's what it is, on the state books. But he will be coming in and serving the function of Deputy SHPO. And for those of you who have interfaced a lot with SHPOs, in most states, it is the Deputy SHPO that serves as sort of the leader of the State Historic Preservation Office. So he'll be coming in and he will assume leadership and management of the SHPO team.
Terrific.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Liz.
You're welcome, Jared.
So my
Any
one
other,
announcement is that I'm very excited to tell you that we are fully started on a comprehensive interactive GIS system.
Oh.
Within 2 years, in less than 2 years, we will have fully digitized all files, and it will be integrated. The database will be integrated with integrated mapping, probably through some kind of GIS. We are using Dewberry, who was a subcontractor on the southern half digitization project. that this project is going a lot further than that one, which was really just the first effort to scan some files in the southern counties and create spatial data. We're actually having a fully functional system, and we also will have a year of maintenance with that contract. So as we're catching all of the errors in the data, we will have an opportunity to correct some of that. And later in the project, I will also be working out methods of field verification, not for every data point, but for a lot of the properties, particularly stuff picked up in the 1966 survey that may or may not be there or may be mapped a mile away. We will start to be correcting some of that information. And we are also working on data use policies and figuring out what kind of password protection or access we will be giving to that data. But it's very exciting. Been on this path for 5 years, and I'm really going to be happy when I can announce that it's done.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Liz. Thanks, everybody. Have a good summer, and make sure we respond to Jenny's request to review the revised information that we've just requested in the Pinto House relocation. So happy summer, everybody.
Right. I think we need a motion, right?
Motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn
Second.
is moved and seconded.
Yeah.
Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Hi.
Goodbye.
Summer. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jenny.